We've just had a really incredible day, and so we're really, really grateful for your presence. Just want to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the Environmental Analysis Program here at Pomona College, and then also, again, the Department of Academic Affairs and Faculty Fridays. We're really grateful for your co-sponsorship, and we're grateful for all your presence today. I've been just really excited about inviting our keynote, Giovanni Aloi, here tonight. In addition to Giovanni's groundbreaking interdisciplinary journal, Antenne, which actually was right in Christian's reading group. And I came across his book, Art and Animals, which questions anthropocentric assumptions about creativity, and even following him on social media has been inspiring, and his love of an insightful and stunning posts on plants, and just the discussions today have been incredible. I'm going to read his bio. So Dr. Giovanni Aloi, as many of you know, is an author, educator, and curator, specializing in the representation of nature and the environment in art. Aloi is the editor-in-chief of Antenne, the Journal of Nature and Visual Culture, and co-editor of Art After Nature book series published by University of Minnesota Press. He's the author and editor of many books on art and nature, including Art and Animals in 2011, Speculative Taxidermy, 2018, Why Look at Plants, The Botanical Emergence in Contemporary Art, 2018, Botanical Speculations, 2018, that must have been quite a year, Giovanni, Lucian Freud, Herbarium, 2019, Vegetal Entwinements in Philosophy and Art, edited with Michael Marder, and Essido Vegetal in 2023. Aloi has contributed to BBC radio programs, served as an academic advisor for many institutions, and has curated exhibitions in the USA and abroad. He lectures on modern and contemporary art at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York. So we welcome Giovanni Aloi.
No, thank you, Claire, for the wonderful introduction. And I want to apologize for this kind of dramatic entrance, like coming down the aisle. It wasn't planned. I was just trying to get one more glass of wine, and I got stuck at the end. So that was great. Yeah, that's all that there was to it. I wasn't trying to impress you with some drama before my talk, which is about migrations and plants. So much of what we discussed today is aligned with my presentation, and I just love it when things somehow fall into place without you possibly knowing how and when. It feels almost like there's some sort of connective energy that brings things together. So I am going to do something a little unusual for me. That's why Claire probably is thinking, I invited you here because you can talk extemporaneously and engage people, and now I'm going to read to you. But I promise you, I've become more interested in exploring narrative, poetics, and sometimes you have to read some of the language that comes out of you. But then I'm going to start just talking to you about art as well. So bear with me, and hopefully it will be interesting and engaging nonetheless. Certainly a glass of wine helps. I hope you had plenty. Have you had plenty? Good. So, how many of you no longer live where they were born? Okay, that's interesting. Just like me. So, when it comes to plants, we often think about stillness, the static, fixitude, how plants don't move. And of course, plants move a great deal. They move in different ways. They move in ways that are oftentimes imperceptible to us, and sometimes we move them with us. And that's in part what I'm interested in exploring to do with you today. And I'm going to go through this in part through a personal narrative, and then discussing the work of two artists who work with live plants in the gallery space in the context of migrations. Everything has been hauled away quickly. 3 hours was all it took, a crew of 5 burly men, to box nearly 20 years of my life in London. The flat is empty, desolate. The shelves are transfixed by the warm afternoon sunshine. It now reaches deep, where until that point, it was never allowed to shine. I stand in an empty shell, at once familiar and alien. The walls remind me of when I first walked in, 5 years prior. Then, an excited and trepidatious first-time owner, I walked through every empty room, staring at the bare walls, envisioning my future. Today, all I can read upon them is memories. I don't know what their future holds. Through the patio doors, once more, I gaze at the garden. How many times have I said goodbye to the plants I cannot take with me to Chicago? There's nothing left in the apartment, but there's a whole world outside that I can bear to let go of. This was my first garden, the first I owned, and that I planted as I wished, without fearing what the landlord might say. There wasn't much when I arrived. A patchy lawn that I promptly shrank to make room for flower beds. An old, twisted buddleia towards the back, in need of TLC, became a wonderful shade provider for the ferns and euphorbias that I would have not been able to otherwise grow there. Towering cardoons, oleanders, honeysuckle, and a passion vine. Much of what I grew there was part of my vegetal mythology. Iconic plants from a childhood spent in the south of Italy. Plants that since have always connected me to faraway people and places that I still long for today. I'd love to take them all with me, but they can't come. A couple of months before my departure, I made a herbarium with some of their leaves arranged against white cards. I turned my beloved plants into relics, indexical traces of our kinship, semi-permanent reminders of their vegetal importance in my life. It was while pressing these plants that the idea of taking some of them with me, after all, started to spring. Succulents, I thought. I'd take cuttings, put them in a Tupperware with a lightly damp kitchen towel, and post it to my Chicago address. I read online that it's okay to bring plants into the US as long as they are not rooted in soil. 3 weeks later, the post lady rings the bell at my new Chicago home. I look at the parcel and smile politely. I can't possibly guess what's inside. I haven't ordered anything, I think. I notice the British stamps. I recognize my own writing. An uncanny collapse looped upon itself. I suddenly remember. I thank the post lady and furtively make my way inside, secretly glad my plan worked after all. I open the Tupperware with trepidation, and there they are. Emerald gems of all shapes. I prepare a bed of fresh sand and soil in a tray, and I carefully position each leaf and mist them a bit. I place the tray outside in the warm air and away from direct sun. There I look at them while I drink coffee, as I track this odd feeling of wholesomeness for a few minutes until it fades. It's as if part of my life in London had finally joined me, past and present, bridging across the Atlantic, not in that static deadliness of all the other possessions that at that point were somewhere in a container at sea, but in a curious and irreplaceable kind of vegetal transmission. There are quite a few different leaves in the parcel, but the most important by far are those of Echeveria lilacina, a gorgeous light gray, almost blue succulent with compact pointy rosettes of leaves. It is not rare by any stretch of the imagination. Mass-produced for summer planters, it's a staple in gardening centers around the world. But this plant is special to me since it is a descendant of one owned by my grandmother, who died in the late 1990s. In the 70s, she gave my mom a rooted cutting to take with her to Milan, where she migrated to. My mom gave me a couple of cuttings to take with me to London in the 1990s, when I relocated there. Through thick and thin, this Echeveria has become an emblem of the immigration stories that have shaped my family, generation after generation. How could I leave all of that behind for good? Leaves sprung roots, then stems became branches. Blooms appeared and returned every year. 8 years later, the plant is still thriving. It's not exactly the same plant my grandmother passed on to my mother, and neither is it the one my mom gave me. And yet, it still is. It is the sum of their love for each other and of mine for them, both crystallized into living vegetal form. Despite looking similar, a replacement plant of the same species could never occupy the same biographical space. Neither could I just gift a cutting of it to someone who is not family. Some plants can become living relics, connections to loved ones no longer within reach. They are among the most precious, and yet they can be as cheap as chips at the gardening store. In the opening of my co-authored book, Wild Plants, The Botanical Emergence in Contemporary Art, I recall how the potted plants my grandmother grew in the south of Italy, in all sorts of random repurposed containers, have impacted my relationships with the vegetal world. Pansies, variegated petunias, the sculptural dish-like foliage of leopard plants, red geraniums, red gloxinias, tall ferns, fuzzy fern asparagus, a giant rubber plant, slender orange and yellow zinnias, African daisies, sharp mother-in-law tongues, dark-leaved Irish roses, 2 small palms, nasturtium, and more nasturtium, and a bonsai-like money tree. There are only some of these plants that today have become staples in my home and garden. Hibiscuses and angel trumpets also occupy a prominent place in a series of vegetal mythologies that bridge faraway places, plants, time, and people. My roots are intertwined with those of the plants that populated my childhood, or with others that for a reason or another have become part of my own mythologies along the way. Vegetal mythologies can develop at any time in one's life. They are markers of life nodes, meaningful moments of shared growth. Blooming and seeding. Vegetal mythologies are fictions that give our lives structure in subtle and often unacknowledged ways. Like the mythical tales central to ancient Japanese, Indian, or Chinese culture, or classical Greece, these narratives are filled with characters linked to reality and yet charged with a sense of magical enchantment that surpasses nature's laws. Vegetal mythologies magnify the memory of certain plant encounters. They transfix and perpetuate. Science and philosophy have taught us to relegate those instances of affect between us and plants to the realm of romanticized futility. Too personal to be shared with others in meaningful ways outside of poetry or novels. These fictions are still today not taken seriously. But most importantly, vegetal mythologies pry open a space between us, science, plants, art, and knowledge, spaces through which we can find ourselves, we can remind ourselves where we come from, and we can see ways to move forward. 8 years down the line, my Echeveria is still thriving, and it no longer is exactly the same plant my mother gave me. It no longer is exactly the same plant my grandmother gave my mother, but it is the same plant in a sense. So I wanted to explore further this personal anecdote in the context of the work of migrations and plants that Ottobo Nkanga has produced over the past years, as well as Fatma Bukank. Some of you might know the work of these artists. Those of you who don't might find their experimentations interesting. Their work addresses and responds to the notion of the "it's alive in the gallery space" question of the symposium. We all know that living plants in the gallery space are difficult. And they're difficult for a number of reasons, because of course, biomatter in the museum, it's part of this clash between preservation and life, death and becoming. Everything that is alive brings with itself a biohazard of some kind. And oftentimes, living matter can only temporarily exist within the walls of the museum. So I wanted to begin with this really beautiful performance by Ottobo Nkanga and her use of night-blooming jasmine. I find that when artists engage with living plants in the gallery space, and I'm thinking about contemporary artists, of course, they really want us to engage with these plants. They really want us to dig deep, not just into the symbolic register. We have all done that, right? Classical still life painting invites us to guess what a red rose means. Well, it means love, you know? It's like we've seen that. In the case of these contemporary artists, the ideas are much deeper, and the origin of the plant, where it's considered a native plant, where it traveled to, really matters. So, in the case of Nkanga's performance that's called Diaspora, a number of women of African descent performs in the gallery space carrying night-blooming jasmine over their heads, as you can see in this image and in the ones that will follow. Oftentimes they break into songs, and as you can see on the floor is some kind of map, a geographical or geological stratification. Those lines are simultaneously the lines of geography, but they're also the line of dance charts, the ones that people would use to learn dances in the 1960s before TikTok took up our time or told us how to dance Gangnam Style. So these women enter the space and they begin to negotiate their presence in a space that it's new to them, in a space that is simultaneously marked and yet very anonymous. Now, many of you put their hands up when I asked how many of you have moved away from the place you were born. So you know that feeling, right? You arrive somewhere new, and it might look a little bit like home, but it's not home at all. And you start wondering who in this dance is going to become a partner, or who is not going to be, who is going to push you aside, who's going to ignore you and not want to dance with you, whose toes you shouldn't be stepping on. And all through that initial process of finding your space and your rhythm, I think that's why the idea of dancing is so powerful in the context of this migration, is that process is delicate, it's somewhat fragile and yet resilient. There's a sense of determination that you have to make that work in order to survive, and you have to negotiate this unknown space while you carry with you on your head a pot, metaphorically, that contains a plant. Rooted, right? The rootedness of this plant is the equivalent of your roots. And that rootedness has become mobile, just like your roots have been taken out of the ground. And whichever way you look at it, whether you wanted to run away from home because home was not the right place to be, or whether you were ousted out of your home, the new environment, the new territory you will try to settle roots into is a challenge. It represents a number of question marks, negotiations. I remember one of the aspects of moving to the United Kingdom that I could have never anticipated was how welcome I was made to feel, which of course in hindsight, I should tell you, I moved to London in 1997, and by the time Brexit rolled in 2016, I started to wonder whether my impression of what I experienced in 1997 was truly genuine or not. But I felt welcome. I felt very welcome, and I felt appreciated and wanted by my new British friends. And yet, for as much as the ground was fertile, there was always a moment in which a misplaced accent, a mispronounced word, a totally missed cultural reference that everyone else knew reminded you of your uprootedness and rekindled that sense of precariousness, which could be easily healed with a beer, or a pint of beer. Fix that. But I'm not telling you, there's trauma and there's trauma, right? And diasporas are all difficult and tragic in very different ways. But there is that sense, I think, in which performances such as this by Otobon Kanga vocalize something that it's so hard for us who migrate to put into words to others. And suddenly you experience this, you witness it, and you understand what you experienced better, and you can tell others who might experience what you experienced, what it's all about. And it's all through this visualization of something that happens every day, all of us moving in different places constantly, just like plants do. I love the choice of plants for this performance. The night blooming jasmine is actually not a jasmine. So I'm sure many of you who have migrated from a country to a country or a city to another have felt that sort of like, it's not quite like an imposter syndrome, but this kind of idea that people perceive you as a species, but you are not that species, but you are called this way, so you should be. It's this there's a kind of like constant not fitting in, right? That I feel that these mobile pots that are carried around all the time exemplify so well. So the night blooming jasmine is actually called in Latin Cestrum nocturnum, and it's of the Solanaceae family, so it's actually related to potatoes, which has nothing to do with jasmine, which is the Oleaceae family, to which the true jasmine belongs. And the plant has grown across the globe. It's a migrating plant in a kind of variety of capacities. And it's originally from the West Indies, but it has become naturalized, which I think is a really interesting word to use in this concept, in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, southern China, and pretty much around the southern United States as well, where it has now become considered a weed. Right? So immigration always carries that shadow that at any point those who migrate elsewhere in this dance of negotiation of perimeters and boundaries and others who migrate with us or not, we might be cast as a weed. And if we had another 6 hours, I would delve deeper into this conception of how artists have engaged with weeds in this very fertile way, in this very productive way, because weeds are resilient, weeds don't give up, weeds pull through all sorts of adversities, and yet they are seen as a threat most of the time. They seem to corrupt notions of purity that are totally fictitious. They seem to pose a threat of domination or subversion of an order that only exists in our minds, and therefore they are repressed. So I thought Nkanga's choice to use this plant is very, very meaningful, and the fact that it's alive is so important because it's a testament to the livingness of this reality that we all experience when we migrate. It's a living experience, and the artist couldn't just have this dancer perform the same dance with plastic plants in pots. The whole performance would just lose its real meaning. And as I found fertile ground in Nkanga's performance, I also found fertile ground in Fatma Bukak's graftings. Again, another metaphor through which we can understand our experiences as migrants. Now, grafting is a very ancient practice. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Again, it's difficult, like I said, there are diasporas and diasporas. Part of what I'm presenting tonight is going to be a text in a book edited by Yota Batsaki at Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C. And it was interesting to correspond with Yota and receive feedback about my original draft. And Yota is originally from Greece, also migrated to the United States. So the questions of which diaspora are you thinking of as you write this emerged. And I thought it was a very productive question. And in a sense, I think my acknowledgement was that any migration, any diaspora entails trauma of some kind. But that trauma is not deadly. It's not terminal. It's not the end of the line. It's a beginning. And it can be a beginning. And to me, these works acknowledge that, while they also acknowledge the fragility of that moment. And if you are any gardeners here? Okay. Obsessive gardeners? Okay, good. So you know that apprehension, right? If you operate something like a grafting onto a plant, if you just place a new plant into the ground, you check on it every day to make sure that it doesn't go dry. Those moments of transplantation require empathy and care to a colossal scale. And grafting requires wounding. You open up the skin of a plant to create usually what is a T-section, but there are so many different kinds of grafting that entail different procedures. And once you've opened up that surface, you insert a cutting from another plant into that stem. I was about to say it's pretty radical. Well, it isn't, because roots are not actually involved in that. But it's such a process. It's quite violent in a sense. And you have to hope for the better, right? You have to hope that it will take. And it's a cohesion between a plant and another plant. And sometimes it takes, at other times it takes. And that's when Jota and I started to have this very interesting back and forth, because I say in my paper that oftentimes the branch that grows through grafting behaves in ways that retain a different identity from the mother plant. It will continue to grow oftentimes in a way that doesn't respect the overall balance of the mother plant. It might not bloom in the same color. It might fruit differently. And I found that equally titillating and troubling. And it goes back to what we were discussing downstairs, I guess, the notion of the individual. When is a grafted plant an individual? So I'll tell you a little bit more about this interesting project. So the fragility of uprooting and the slow process entailed by migration and assimilation is very much exemplified in the work by Fatma Bukak's Damascus Rose that she began in 2016. Sometimes grown in individual pots, emblems of portability and misplacement, that applies of course to both performances. At others situated in gardens, Bukak's roses tell stories of cultural identity, loss, and regeneration. Damascus roses are not just any ornamental rose. The history of this cherished plant can be traced back to ancient times, particularly in the Middle East and Mediterranean regions. This variety of roses is known for its exquisite fragrance and beauty and holds cultural symbolic importance in Syria. Its name derives from the region around Damascus, where it has been cultivated for centuries to produce rose water, essential oils, dried blooms, cosmetics, and it is also used in Syrian cuisine. So you can see how plants always pervades our everyday life in a way that sometimes we forget. If you migrate somewhere else, that's what we always want to bring with us, isn't it? The plants. Even if home was a place you wanted to run away from, the plants can still represent something good about that place. And I think it's incredibly powerful that as immigrants, we can reserve that right through plants to extrapolate what was good of that reality that wasn't good and retain that with us in our new lives, wherever we go. If the weather allows, of course. Now, this versatility of the Damascus rose has also played a significant role in the country's economy. Its cultivation and oil production have been important industries in Syria for centuries. The rose oil, known as attar of rose, is highly sought after and has been exported to different parts of the world. The rose industry has also provided employment opportunities, and it has contributed to the country's economic growth. This prominence has been celebrated in literature, poetry, and art throughout history, and has become a cultural icon embodying the essence of Syrian heritage. I hope you can see these graftings, right? It's not just the plant we carry with us, but the plant grafting onto culture cuisine, economy. It just keeps expanding and expanding this notion of individual that becomes always collective. And again, I want to invite you to think about migrations of all kinds as collectivities, like in Nkanga's performance. I don't know many of you, but those of you who put their hands up and said, I no longer live where I was born, we share something in common. We have shared that experience, and we don't even know each other. Maybe we haven't talked yet, but we could probably sit or go back downstairs, it seems to be a productive space, and talk about that and recognize very similar baselines to our experience. And I think that is important. And if we can process that, if we can pinpoint those moments of growth through plants in art, I think that's priceless. So Bukak draws on her own experience as a member of the Kurdish minority in Turkey, as well as from the state of the world today, where violence, migration, dispossession, and repression have significantly altered human life. Her grafts of Damascus cuttings on European or American varieties of roses point to the complexity of integration and assimilation of those who migrate, abandon their roots in their homeland, and have to adopt new ones. Bukak's grafting of multiple roses onto a single stem reflects the fusion of diverse culture and complexities of identity. At what point can we say that the original Damascus rose has become a different species? The blooms might resemble the ones of the native plant, but the roots that feed the bloom are no longer Syrian and no longer feed from Syrian soil. With its historical and cultural ties, the flower becomes a symbol of the possibility of harmonious blossoming across civilizations. However, the artist is deeply aware that not all attempts of grafting will take. And that's when Jota and I started to pull back and forth, back and forth. What do we mean by this? I know many friends who didn't survive in London, that moved there in 1997 like I did, doing like jobs that were absolutely backbreaking and getting by with very little money, looking at the kitchen cabinet, and it's empty again. What a surprise. They went back to Milan. Maybe it worked out nonetheless for them, I'm glad, but I wanted to stick to it. I couldn't go back. There's too much in my uprooting from Italy that couldn't allow me to return. So what happens to the grafts that don't take? What happens to the ones that take? In her work, Bukak embraces failure as part of her process. Some grafts are stronger than others and will bloom, others never will, and some will just be rejected by the new mother plant, shrivel, and eventually fade away. These dimensions are integral part of this installation. But her artwork prompts viewers to reflect on the fluidity of identity and the ways cultures can influence, enrich one another. It also serves as a reminder of the importance of valuing and safeguarding cultural heritage while embracing the potential for growth and transformation through the exchange of ideas and influences. In the artist's hands, the act of grafting becomes a subversive gesture, one that questions the boundaries and divisions imposed by society, history, and time. It symbolizes the potential for transformation and resilience, as well as the power of art to challenge and reshape existing structures. It is not a coincidence that both Nkanga and Bukak should have opted to work with plants to express these complex ideas. In the semantic framework outlined by these artists, the livingness of plants embodies the unstoppable forces of time's passing, the type of process that shapes us into who we are, and that never is just down to desire, dreams, or drives. Plant identity, as Michael Marder has conceived it, is inexorably shaped by the environment in which a vegetal being grows. A sheer exposure in space and time, he calls it. Michael Marder says, quote, "Given that the plant's self, bound to the universality of the elements and of light, is always external to itself, its unity is at once a disunity." End of quote. It is this very conception of vegetal disunity, one that nonetheless can exist in an apparently finite body, that can help us appreciate the subtleties of certain circumstances we experience on our skin and bones, and that the outdated humanist conceptions of finitude that has for centuries obfuscated and concealed other conceptions of identities keep perpetrating. It is with this heightened awareness that plant being provides that important metaphors might help us to better comprehend and grasp the nuances involved in diasporas of all kinds. Metaphors that might make the struggle bearable and perhaps even help the graft to successfully take. Thank you.